The wind screams across a cold, restless sea. Dark waves rise like mountains, crashing violently against jagged cliffs. And far beyond that chaos, there is a small island. Isolated, vulnerable, almost forgotten by the world. A place no one would ever expect to rule it. But here's the thing. That tiny island would one day command a global empire so vast that the sun would never set on it. And what happened next changed the fate of the entire world. Imagine standing on that island over 1,000 years ago. No grand cities, no powerful fleets, no empire, only fear, because this land was constantly under attack. First came the Romans, marching in with discipline and iron. They built roads, forts, and cities, but they never truly stayed. Then they left, and when they did, chaos followed. Tribes fought tribes. Kingdoms rose and fell overnight. The land we now call England was broken, divided, fragile. You might be wondering, how does something so unstable become the center of a global empire? Well, the answer begins with invasion. The year is 1066. A cold wind blows across the battlefield of Hastings. On one side, King Harold of England. On the other, a man who refused to accept fate, William of Normandy. He believed the English crown was his by right, and he wasn't asking for it. He came to take it. The battle was brutal. Arrows filled the sky. Steel clashed against steel. Men fell, screaming into the mud. And then in a single moment, everything changed. King Harold was struck down. And just like that, England was no longer ruled by its own. William became king. But this wasn't just a victory. It was a transformation. William didn't just conquer England. He reshaped it. He brought new systems, new laws, a new ruling class. Castles rose across the land, symbols of control, fear, and power. The English language itself began to change, blending with French. And slowly, something new was forming. Not just a kingdom, but a foundation. But here's the twist. Even this powerful New England was still just a small player in a dangerous world. Because beyond its shores, other giants were rising. Spain, Portugal, France. And they had one thing on their minds: exploration. The oceans once feared as endless voids were now becoming highways. Men began to ask dangerous questions. What lies beyond the horizon? What if there are lands richer than anything we've ever seen? And England was late to the game. Spain and Portugal had already begun claiming lands across the world. Gold, silver, spices, wealth beyond imagination. England watched, waited, and then decided to act. Enter a new kind of warrior. Not kings, not knights, but explorers. Men like Sir Francis Drake. He wasn't just a sailor. He was bold, daring, and just a little reckless. He circled the globe, attacked Spanish ships, and returned home with treasures. To Spain, he was a pirate. To England, he was a hero, and standing behind him was a queen who understood the power of ambition. Queen Elizabeth I. She ruled with intelligence, patience, and quiet strength. But she knew something others didn't. England could not survive by staying small. It had to expand. It had to take risks. And that decision would soon lead to one of the greatest confrontations in history. Spain, the most powerful empire of its time. Its navy unstoppable, its wealth unmatched, and its king furious. Because England had crossed the line. They had attacked Spanish ships, supported Spain's enemies, and dared to challenge its dominance. So Spain prepared to crush England once and for all. They assembled a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men sailing toward England. Their mission was simple: invade, destroy, conquer. Back in England, fear spread like wildfire. This was no ordinary threat. This was survival. And Queen Elizabeth knew it. Imagine her standing before her troops, not as a distant ruler, but as a leader willing to stand and fight. She said words that would echo through history. I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. You might be wondering, was that enough? Could words stop an empire? No, but belief could. And belief changes everything. The battle that followed wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy. The English Navy, smaller, faster, more agile, faced the giant Spanish fleet. Instead of direct confrontation, they used speed, fire ships, precision attacks, and then nature joined the fight. Storms tore through the Spanish Armada. Ships crashed, men drowned, the once invincible fleet shattered. And just like that, England survived. But more importantly, England proved something to the world. It could fight, it could win, and it was ready for something bigger. This victory didn't just save England, it ignited something. Confidence, ambition, and a belief that the ocean was no longer a barrier, but an opportunity. And this is where everything changed, because now, England didn't just want to survive, that it wanted to dominate. Ships began to sail farther than ever before. Across the Atlantic, toward unknown lands. North America, harsh, wild, unforgiving, but full of possibility, colonies were established. Jamestown, Plymouth. At first survival was a struggle. Hunger, disease, conflict. Many didn't make it, but those who did built something new, that a new world connected to England. And this was just the beginning. Because while one hand reached toward America, the other stretched toward something even more valuable. India. But here's the twist. England didn't conquer India with armies at first. It used something far more powerful. Trade. In 1600, a company was born. The East India Company. At first, it was just a group of merchants buying spices, silk, tea, but slowly, quietly it grew stronger. It built forts, raised armies, made alliances, and before anyone fully realized what was happening, a company had become a ruler. Imagine that. Not a king, not a nation, a company, controlling land, people, wealth, and India, one of the richest regions in the world, was now under its influence. But this wasn't just business. This was power, and power always demands more. Back in England, something else was happening. Something even more powerful than war or trade, a revolution. Not of kings, but of machines. The Industrial Revolution. Factories began to rise. Steam engines roared to life. Production exploded. You might be wondering, why does this matter? Because for the first time in history, a nation could produce goods faster, cheaper, and in massive quantities. And those goods needed markets. They needed places to sell, places to control, places to dominate. And suddenly, the empire wasn't just about land. It was about economy, influence, control, and now everything was connected. Colonies provided raw materials. Factories turned them into products. Markets across the world bought them. A perfect system for Britain, but not for everyone else, because behind the power, behind the wealth, there was suffering. People in colonies were not equals. Their resources were taken, their voices ignored, their lives controlled, and slowly resistance began to grow. But that part of the story comes later, because right now, the empire was rising, faster than anyone could have imagined, stronger than ever before, and soon it would reach its peak. But here's the question: at what cost? The world was changing, and at the center of it stood Britain, not as a small island anymore, but as a force that stretched across oceans, continents, and cultures. If you looked at a map during the 19th century, you'd see something incredible. Red. Everywhere: Canada, Australia, parts of Africa, the Caribbean, flushed lands in Asia. It wasn't just expansion, it was domination. They called it the empire on which the sun never sets. Because no matter what time it was, somewhere, the British flag was flying under daylight. But here's the thing: empires don't just grow because they're strong. They grow because they're hungry. Imagine the ports of London during this time. Ships arriving from every corner of the world, loaded with cotton from India, sugar from the Caribbean, gold and diamonds from Africa, tea from China. The air filled with noise, smoke, and ambition. This wasn't just trade, this was a global system, and Britain was at the center of it. You might be wondering, how did one island manage all of this? The answer lies in three powerful forces: the Navy, the economy, and belief. The British Navy wasn't just strong, it was dominant. Their ships controlled the seas, protected trade routes, and crushed enemies before they could rise. Wherever British ships sailed, influence followed, and sometimes control. But here's the twist. Not all control came through war. Sometimes it came through ideas. Britain believed it had a mission, that a dangerous belief, that it was bringing civilization to the world. Language, laws, education, technology, and yes, in some places, these things brought progress. Railways were built, institutions were created, trade expanded, but at the same time, cultures were suppressed, resources were drained. People were treated as subjects, not equals. And this contradiction would later come back to haunt the empire. Let's go deeper into one of its most important regions. India, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. But here's the truth. That jewel didn't come easily to AT first. The East India Company controlled trade. But over time, trade turned into power, and power turned into rule. Armies were formed, battles were fought, and piece by piece, India fell under British control. But people don't stay silent forever. In 1857, something exploded, the Indian Rebellion. Also known as the First War of Independence. Soldiers, civilians, leaders rose up against British rule. Anger that had been building for years finally broke free. For a moment, it looked like the empire might lose its grip, but Britain responded with force, brutal, decisive, relentless. The rebellion was crushed, but the message was clear. This empire was not unbreakable. After this, something important happened. The British Crown took direct control of India. The era of the East India Company ended, and a new phase began. The British Raj. Now, India wasn't just influenced by Britain. It was ruled by it. But beneath the surface, something was growing. Resistance, identity, and a desire for freedom. But we'll come back to that, because the empire was still rising. The British Navy wasn't just strong, that it was dominant. Across Africa, European powers rushed to claim land, that a race, that a scramble. And Britain was right in the middle of it. Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya. Lines are drawn on maps, often ignoring the people who live there. Resources were taken, labor was exploited, control was enforced. And yet, the empire kept expanding, because at this moment in history, no one seemed strong enough to stop it. But here's the truth about power. The bigger it gets, the harder it becomes to control, and cracks had already started to form. Let's go back to America Point, one of Britain's earliest and most valuable colonies. It had grown strong, economically, socially, politically, and its people were starting to ask questions. Why are we being taxed without representation? Why are decisions being made across an ocean? And slowly, those questions turned into anger, and that anger turned into revolution. The American Revolution, a turning point. 13 colonies stood up against the empire at first. It seemed impossible. How could they defeat Britain, the most powerful empire in the world? But here's the twist. They didn't fight alone. France, Britain's old enemy, stepped in, and suddenly, the balance shifted. War dragged on, losses mounted, and eventually, Britain had to face the unthinkable. It lost. America became independent. And just like that, the empire suffered a major crack. You might think this would weaken Britain. And in some ways it did, but in another way it changed strategy. Instead of controlling settlers, Britain focused more on controlling trade routes, resources, and key regions. It adapted and continued to grow. But then came something no empire could fully control. Time. The 20th century arrived, and with it a storm unlike anything the world had ever seen. World War I, a global conflict. Massive, brutal, devastating. Britain fought with everything it had. Soldiers from across the empire were called to fight. India, Africa, Australia, Canada. Millions joined the war effort, and together they faced a terrifying reality. Modern warfare, machine guns, trenches, gas. The cost was unimaginable. And when the war ended, Britain had technically won. But at what cost? Its economy weakened, its people exhausted, its dominance shaken. But the worst was yet to come. World War II, even more destructive, even more intense. This time, Britain stood against a rising force in Europe. Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler. Cities were bombed. Lives were shattered. The nation stood on the edge, and yet it refused to fall. Under the leadership of Winston Churchill, Britain fought back. His words gave people strength. We shall never surrender. But even victory came with a price. After World War II, the world had changed completely. New superpowers had emerged: the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain. It was no longer the center of the world. At the same time, something powerful was rising within the colonies, a desire that could no longer be ignored. Freedom. Let's return to India, because this is where everything changed. A man, simple in appearance but powerful in spirit, began to challenge the empire. Mahatma Gandhi. He didn't use weapons, he used truth. Nonviolence. Mass movements. You might be wondering, how can peace defeat an empire? But here's the twist. It did. Protests grew. Pressure increased. The cost of control became too high. And finally, in 1947, India became independent, at a moment that shook the empire to its core. Because if India could break free, others could too. And they did. One by one, colonies across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean gained independence. The empire began to fade, not in a single moment, but slowly, inevitably. By the late 20th century, the British Empire was no longer an empire. It had transformed into something different. The Commonwealth, a group of independent nations connected by history, but not controlled. And now, we return to that island, the one surrounded by cold seas, the one that once seemed small, vulnerable, insignificant. It had risen to dominate the world, and then it had changed. But here's the question that still echoes today. Was the British Empire a force of progress, bringing industry, ideas, and global connection? Or was it a force of control that took more than it gave and left scars that still exist today? Because the truth is, it was both. And history is never simple. Now, I ask you, when you look at the legacy of the British Empire, what do you see? A story of ambition and greatness, or a lesson about the cost of power?